execute through the economic recovery plan that the president has announced. And of course, our capacity to generate revenue to finance the needs of South Africans do not only rely on economic growth, but on the institutional capacity of SARS, because the economy can grow, but if we are not able to extract that revenue through SARS, we will still not be able to generate the necessary revenue that we need. And since its establishment, SARS has had a couple of commissions which look at the best ways to strengthen SARS capacity to extract revenue to finance state functions. In the post-apartheid South Africa, there have been 3 commissions, namely Katz, Davis, and Nugent Commission, to look at different aspects of SARS governance and institutional capacity. The Katz Commission was established to look at an institutional design and metrics, governance metrics concerning to governance issues. The Davis Commission also made certain recommendations on the tax policy, including base erosion and profit shifting. The Nugent Commission was established to look at the allegations of poor governance and mismanagement at SARS. And this was framed as state capture, which had engulfed many of our state institutions in the recent years. It's almost 2 years since the Nugent Commission completed its work. And indeed, the Commission confirmed instances of maladministration, mismanagement at SARS. And we're here to report, Chair, on the work that is being done to make sure that these recommendations are implemented. And in implementing the Nugent recommendations, which are necessary, our view is that we need to go beyond them because they are not sufficient to put SARS on a long trajectory of excellence. In other words, as much as we need to implement these recommendations, we need to go beyond what Nugent has recommended to make sure that SARS is one of the best revenue authority in the world and recover the lost grounds that we have lost in the past. And you'll be pleased, Chair, to know that we are not appointing another committee to appoint the Commission's recommendation, the Nugent and other commissions as recommendations. We are doing it ourselves. But in doing so, we've got the division of labor between ourselves as National Treasury, as well as SARS, just to make sure that we implement these recommendations. So guiding our division of labor between SARS and National Treasury in the implementation of these recommendations, we've conceptualized our division of labor in terms of the governance of SARS and governance in SARS. So we are, as National Treasury, largely responsible for the implementation of recommendations that are related to what the Commissioner will say, governance of SARS, and he's responsible for the recommendations that are about governance within SARS itself. So the governance of SARS recommendations will include the legislative and policy environment within which SARS operate, because SARS does not set the policy environment, the legislative environment within which it operates. Otherwise, if it were to do so, it will be a referee and a player at the same time. So, and some of those legislative amendments. We obviously have to bring it to your attention for your consideration. And there has been a number of things that we've done on the front of the governance of SARS, including the appointment of the commissioner, who has been appointed. I think he took office on the 1st of May 2020 with a daunting task of collecting revenue during an economic downturn and rebuilding SARS under very difficult conditions. And I think he will report on the things that he has done with respect to governance of SARS, management of SARS is concerned. And regarding the governance of SARS, we will present, Chair, what we have done so far, insofar as that area is concerned. But you'll also recall that the previous feedback session, which you convened in September 2019, we indicated our initial progress, and at the time, we had envisaged a busy legislative program for 2020 to give effect to many of the governance recommendations from the Nugent Commission. Unfortunately, Chair, that program was overtaken by the extraordinary demands imposed by the outbreak of COVID. Therefore, today we'll provide feedback on our progress against the 27 specific recommendations in the final report, though we'll also include progress in addressing other challenges identified in the report. Chair, let me take this opportunity and ask Momo to present what we will call the governance of SARS. What is it that we're doing in that regard? And what is it that we're planning to do? And we will also outline the timelines within which we intend to implement or conclude the recommendations that came from the Nugent Commission. And later on, the SARS commissioner, without me coming back, he will lay out what are the things that they are doing internally, and he will also be at liberty to raise any other issue that is related to SARS, given where we are and where we should be going. Let me hand over to Momo to do the brief presentation, and that will be followed by the SARS commissioner. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Mr. Momoniat, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and morning to honorable members and everybody else. I don't know if Ellen is going to put up my presentation. Thanks, Ellen. So, Chair, just a minor correction on what the Deputy Minister said. The Commissioner was appointed 1st of May 2019, Deputy Minister last year, not this year. So just to correct that minor year issue. So, Chair, if you look at, and frankly, when I look back, 2019 seems like years ago, just with COVID. So it's quite recent that the commissioner was appointed. So he's only been there about 1.5 years now. Next slide, sorry. So, Chair, the final report of the Nugent Commission was published around the 14th December 2018 by the presidency, because, as you know, commissions report to the president. So I think the judge had submitted sometime in November, but there was a legal action that the former commissioner had taken out. And when his court application was dismissed, the presidency then was able to release the report around the 14th of December. The Commission had issued an interim report in October 2018, and in fact, that the main recommendation in the interim report was the removal of the then commissioner, which then was instituted by the president around, I think it was March 2019. March 2019. That was a bit earlier. So the commissioner had been suspended in March 2018, and there was both a disciplinary process which ran in parallel, and when the Nugent recommendation came, the president had then removed the former commissioner. So he gave effect to the first recommendation in the interim report almost immediately, and the process then to appoint the new commissioner started in February 2019. And I should add, Chair, that that was also done in terms of a whole recommendation of how the process should function, that it should be very transparent. It should have a panel of largely people who weren't operating in a political sphere. It had integrity, and that they had to then provide a report to the minister, which would be made public. So it was a pretty transparent process. But the judge did say that the interview process needed to be what he called a private process or closed process, where cameras weren't allowed, but they would be reporting on the process thereafter. So that was what happened. So I think I won't go into the Nugent Commission. I think it outlined many instances of maladministration and mismanagement between 2014 and 2017. That was the scope or the period that it looked at. It looked at the problems, just to remind members, of the disastrous restructuring of SARS, which interestingly seemed to have been hatched between Bain and the former commissioner, even before Commissioner Moyani was appointed commissioner. So it was all done very secretly and without Bain even knowing what SARS was about, that they already had slides which are available, which the commission released, and that was done on the sworn oath of the former head of Bain, which outlined some of the planning that took place in 2013. So lots of key institutions were weakened. Enforcement was weakened. As the commission said, the units that investigated illicit trades ceased to exist. Revenue collection suffered. Yes, some of the decline was due to the economy, but I think a significant part was because the institution had been so weakened. So its ability, the large business center, for example, had also been fragmented and broken up to report in other ways. There were massive abuse of procurement processes, especially around large scale contracts. And many of these were referred to the criminal authorities. I think, Chair, this is one area that also needs to be followed up, is what the criminal prosecuting authorities have done on the recommendations that relate to criminal investigations that should be taken up. Again, some of the multinationals that were consultancies that were involved, and the former commissioner. But there were 27 specific recommendations. I mean, there's a lot in the report that outlines the problems and so on, but the commission narrowed itself to these 27. And the long-term objective, I think, was to get a robust organizational and decision-making culture for SARS. It focused a lot on how to prevent future abuse, how to get governance right. Sorry, next slide. And so, in a sense, it outlined, and I think, Chair, like what the Deputy Minister has said, there's governance processes obviously within SARS, and there's governance processes over SARS. In terms of the within SARS process, the way the current legislation is on SARS, the commissioner is really all the power of SARS resides with the commissioner. And that's why if you have a bad commissioner, it can be disastrous. And so the commission put in place various structures. They, in particular, talked about establishing an Inspector General's office, and that was largely to ensure that there wasn't abuse in the way SARS functions, as opposed to, I should say, what the Ombud does. So this is not how there may be abuse with regard to a particular taxpayer's affairs by SARS, that they go to the Ombud. The Inspector General is an inspector. He or she would go and see how is SARS doing large settlements. For example, if you do large settlements and they very cushy settlements, the company involved is certainly not going to complain that they were badly done by. The issue is, was the settlement fair to the country? So they would be able to deal with that. If problems, who do they go to? Because the provisions of secrecy within is strong. And so you want some sort of ways can be picked up, powerful in the type of data do they go to, because the provisions of secret, and certainly you see when it came to those things are released by a taxpayer, but certainly want their tax information to put out. But we won't go there now. Now, current system, the prerogative of the Minister of Finance to enable, and some of it will require hard legislation. So the area of tax policy, and much of that has been done all the time, whether it's introducing a carbon tax, whether it's in 1994, when we came into government, discrimination, for example, against mainly women, and obviously, so tax policy would address in the tax companies, the taxpayer. There were issues. All of those generally would get residency-based system. Those for public comment, and they become very involved processes. So those major changes that we have, they tend to be done through a commission, and it normally takes a few years before they can be put in place. So one that and it's all cycle. Then there's tax administration issues that's dealt with normally in the tax administration laws bill, the so-called TALAP bill, and this also obviously was dealt with in a big way when the Talab bill was put in place. But aside from that, nowadays, it's also very IT driven, as you see with this year's automated personal income tax assessments. So it's both legislation and the systems changes that they have to make, I think, are enormous. And lastly, I think, is just the oversight and governance over SARS. And that's what we'll focus on today. But I will touch on the tax policy changes very briefly, since the chair has asked to talk about the other commissions. So I'll quickly just go through a history of these commissions. Next slide. So, Chair, you know, I think all governments tend to have major commissions on tax, on their tax system. Probably at least, I would say once every, we won't go there 20 now, years, now current system. Sometimes it might be every 10 years, but they tend to have a major and some commission. So even well before 1994, you had the Franzen Commission in 1969. And just before 1994, you had the Margot Commission. And in fact, many of the approaches towards SARS were first raised require the Margot Commission on the legislation, on the autonomy of the revenue collector. So the area of tax policy, we found that in the Treasury building, there were much of that has been done all the time, whether it's what is now using a carbon tax, whether it's, so if I remember, there was a 16th floor, you had the Commissioner for Inland Revenue to government. You also had separate, for example, that commissioner, you had a commissioner for excise, I think it was called Customs and Excise. So they were separate, they were departmental officials, they got paid like us officials do. And then in 94 was the first, I'm sure it's the first commission that made the democratic government set up. And it was set up within 3 months of the election. And if you remember, I think President Mandela was only sworn in sometimes in May. So by June, he set up the Katz Commission, which was chaired tax policy would address Mr. Michael Katz. Judge Davis was also a member of that commission, and there were other notables at the time. And that commission led to all of those. Well, let me just go through. And then in 2014 or 2013-14, there was a Davis Tax Committee that was set up. I should add, Chair, that those public comment was not a commission. It was a very involved process. To have a commission, so those major changes that we have, they tend to be done through a commission. You have to. It's the president normally takes a few years before they can be. But the Davis Tax Committee was an cycle, a ministerial advisory committee, and of course, then in 2018, dealt with normally Nugent Tax Administration Laws Commission, which was established by the president. We can move on to the so-called Talab bill, and this also obviously was dealt with in a big way when the Talab bill was put in place. But aside from that, nowadays, it's also very IT driven, as you see with this year's commission took up the theme and its very first report, so which was then both legislation. I mean, within 3 months of the commission being established in '94, they already then talked about the need in an interim report for an autonomous administration, that which they then took up in a further report. In their third report, they had 11 reports over quite a few years. But the third report was done by 1995, and it largely laid the basis for SARS. And you can see Section 2 of the SARS Act in 1997 said that it's hereby established as an organ of state within the public administration, but outside the public service. So they were no longer officials, government officials like some of us are in the Treasury. And there was initially a requirement for a board. If I remember, it was chaired by the first Chief Justice of our country, Michael Cobbett, who is now late. But that provision was removed in an amendment in 2002. Next slide, please. So, Chair, I think I've gone through these points. I'm not going to go through any. As I said, there were 8 reports that were published. 8 or 11, I'm not sure, but I might have the number wrong. You know, if you look at the interim report, for example, it just didn't deal with the establishment of SARS, but it also removed race-based and gender-based discrimination from our system, which was speedily implemented, I should say. And it also dealt with obvious things like integrating all the different Bantustan